Nietzsche destroys the MAGA illusion, the truth you're not supposed to know. You feel it. Something is off. The slogans are loud, but the silence inside is louder. You shout to belong. But the more you chant, the less you recognize your own voice. You were promised greatness, but you live in fear. You were told you're free, yet everything feels scripted. What if the truth is uglier than betrayal? What if you were never supposed to think for yourself? Nietzsche saw it coming. Not the red hats or the rallies, but the deeper sickness underneath. The herd. The need to obey. The addiction to simple answers for unbearable truths. He called it ressentiment. A spiritual rot disguised as patriotism. A rebellion of the weak that imitates strength, while poisoning the very soul it claims to protect. This video won't comfort you. It will burn your illusions, one by one. Because Nietzsche didn't care about politics, he cared about power. The kind that enslaves minds in the name of freedom. If you still have the courage to see clearly, stay. And don't forget, like this video, subscribe, and activate the bell. Because truth like this won't be shown to you by accident. Part 1. The Illusion of Strength. How False Power Seduces the Weak. They call it strength. But it's not strength. It's noise. Volume. Repetition. It's a theater of certainty built on insecurity. Nietzsche warned us that the masses don't crave truth. They crave comfort dressed as truth. And comfort, when institutionalized, becomes obedience. You mistake the raised fist for power. But real power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg to be seen. MAGA isn't a movement. It's a mask. A mask worn by the resentful, by those who feel powerless in a world that moves too fast for them. And Nietzsche understood this psychology better than any modern analyst. When you can't rise, you glorify the fall. When you can't build, you sanctify destruction. It's not just political, it's existential. You tell yourself the enemy is out there. But Nietzsche whispers, the enemy is within. It's the part of you that resents those who are free. The part that wants to control because it cannot create. The part that turns weakness into virtue and bitterness into moral superiority. That is ressentiment. And it breeds illusion. The illusion that you're strong because you've joined something bigger. That your voice matters because it echoes louder. That your beliefs are righteous because they're popular. But Nietzsche shows us the terrifying truth. Most people don't want to be free. They want to be ruled by something that tells them they're right. And when they can't find God, they build a God in their own image. Loud, fragile, angry, addicted to applause. And they call that God America. But it's not America, it's ego, disfigured and weaponized. The cult of the self disguised as a nation. This is what Nietzsche meant by slave morality. The inversion of values. Where real power, creativity, courage, independence is seen as a threat. And obedience, victimhood, and outrage become sacred. They call it taking back control. But it's really surrendering your soul to a collective fantasy. And when you speak out, they'll tell you you're the problem. They'll accuse you of betrayal. But Nietzsche would ask, betrayal of what? Of a lie? Of a system built on fear and imitation? Then yes, betray it. The real betrayal is to remain silent while the herd marches off a cliff, chanting your name. Because that's not loyalty. It's cowardice dressed as pride. And no flag, no slogan, no movement can save you from the consequences of lying to yourself. So ask yourself, do you want to feel powerful, or do you want to be powerful? Because one is easy. The other will destroy everything you thought you were. Comment below, have you ever confused loudness with strength? Part 2, Slave Morality Reborn, when victims become the new masters. Nietzsche's most terrifying insight wasn't about the powerful, it was about the powerless. About what happens when resentment becomes identity. When those who feel humiliated by life find their revenge not by rising, but by redefining what it means to rise. They call weakness virtue. And they build a new morality to make it law. This is what he called slave morality. A system created not by the noble, but by the bitter. by those who couldn't stand the beauty of strength. So they declared it evil, and praised suffering as salvation, not because they were holy, but because they had no other weapon. Now look around. What do you see? A culture obsessed with grievance, with blaming, shaming, pointing fingers. The oppressed have become priests. They don't want power to create, they want it to punish. And MAGA? It's not a return to strength. It's the ultimate form of slave morality. Because it doesn't build a future. It clings to a myth of the past. A past where we were great. But Nietzsche would ask, great in whose eyes? It's not about progress, it's nostalgia as sedative. A dream of purity that never existed. The herd longs for it because it erases responsibility. You don't have to evolve. You just have to remember how things used to be. And in that memory, no one has to grow. But here's the cruelty. That myth feeds on your pain. On your poverty, your confusion, your lost pride. It tells you you're a victim, then sells you revenge. But real strength doesn't seek revenge. It transcends it. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the higher man, is not born from bitterness. He's forged through self-overcoming. He walks alone. He doesn't need a crowd, a chant, a leader. Because he has something rarer. An inner law. But that terrifies the herd. Because if you don't follow the script, you make them feel their emptiness. And so they mock the thinker. They exile the artist. They silence the rebel. And they call it protecting values. Yet Nietzsche knew those values are not eternal. They are inventions. Tools for the herd to control the brave. And when you realize this, something dangerous happens. You start to think. Really think. And thought, in a culture of imitation, is the ultimate crime. So ask yourself again. Are you being true or just obedient? Comment below. Have you ever felt punished for thinking differently? Part 3. The herd's God, worshipping control, destroying freedom. They speak of God. But it's not God they worship. It's authority. Structure. Order. Not divine mystery, but predictable comfort. They chant freedom while begging to be ruled. And Nietzsche saw this contradiction with surgical clarity. Because the God of the herd isn't sacred, it's safe. A God who blesses their sameness. Who punishes the outcast. Who justifies their fears and sanctifies their anger. This God doesn't demand transformation. He rewards stagnation. And when this God puts on a red hat, he becomes an idol of control. A symbol not of transcendence, but of tribal belonging. No complexity, no contradiction, only certainty. That's the appeal. In a chaotic world, people cling to whatever makes them feel secure. But Nietzsche warned, this safety is a coffin. It buries the will to power. It suffocates the spirit that dares to say, I will. And in its place, it installs obedience. Not the noble kind that respects life, but the blind kind that fears the unknown. This is why Nietzsche said, God is dead, not as a celebration, but as a tragedy. Because the death of God leaves a void. And the herd fills that void with noise, with slogans, with movements that demand loyalty but offer no soul. What replaces God is not truth. It's narrative. A story you're forced to repeat until you believe it's your own. And those who don't repeat it, they're heretics, enemies, un-American. But real freedom cannot grow in soil poisoned by fear. It requires inner chaos. It requires doubt. It requires the courage to walk without a banner and still know who you are. That's what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. It's not about choosing a side. It's about stepping beyond sides. Beyond the need to belong to the herd. Beyond the need to be right in the eyes of the crowd. But here's the price. You will be alone. You will be misunderstood. And you will be hated. Not because you're wrong, but because you're awake. So the question is, do you worship safety? Or do you worship truth? Comment below. Have you ever felt tempted to conform just to feel accepted? Part 4. The Architecture of Obedience, how society trains you to kneel. Obedience doesn't begin with chains. It begins with stories. Told to you as a child, whispered through classrooms, churches, and screens. You are not taught how to think. You are trained to believe, to repeat, to trust those who shout the loudest. Nietzsche knew this indoctrination well. He saw it in the classroom, in the pulpit, in the family name. Tradition, he said, is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's just dead men's lies passed off as sacred. And the more afraid a society becomes, the more it clings to those lies. The MAGA myth is built on this fear. Fear of change. Fear of complexity. Fear that the world might move on without you. And so it sells you a fantasy. That power lies in going backwards. But Nietzsche would spit on that nostalgia. Because real power doesn't return, it transforms. And transformation requires death. Death of your illusions, your innocence, your dependence. But society doesn't want you reborn. It wants you useful. Useful to the system, to the flag, to the cause. And so they teach you how to kneel. With pride. As if submission were strength. And it works. Because the training is invisible. You laugh at the wrong people. You vote out of fear. You punish the different and worship the familiar. And you call it patriotism. But Nietzsche would ask, whose values are you defending? Whose morality do you serve? Because the highest morality isn't given. It's earned. Through suffering. Through solitude. And those who create it. They are not loved. They are crucified. Because they remind the herd that freedom isn't safe. It's a fire. And fire burns. So the structure of obedience must always silence the dangerous. The artist. The outsider. The thinker who dares to say, this is not truth. This is control. And the moment you say that, you're no longer one of them. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the path to your real self begins where your loyalty ends. Comment below. Have you ever questioned the values you were raised with? Part 5. The cost of awakening. Why most people choose the lie. Most people don't want to awaken. They want relief. They want a villain to blame and a hero to follow. They want a story that explains their pain, but doesn't demand they change. They'd rather be lied to with comfort than slapped by the truth. And MAGA offers that lie, wrapped in red, white, and rage. Nietzsche saw it not as politics, but as pathology. The herd doesn't seek truth, they seek anesthesia. They crave leaders who speak in absolutes. Because ambiguity requires thinking, and thinking hurts. So they trade awareness for loyalty, and call it strength. But awakening is not a reward. It's a wound. A violent tearing away of everything false. The slogans you repeated. The enemies you feared. The identity you wore like armor. All of it begins to rot in your hands. You start to see through it. The patriotism that was really control. The morality that was just manipulation. The pride that masked deep humiliation. And the moment you see, you're no longer one of them. Because the crowd doesn't forgive vision. It forgives sin. It forgives lies. But it does not forgive those who see what it cannot. To see clearly is to be cursed. And most choose blindness because it feels like belonging. Nietzsche called it the slave revolt in morality. When the weak redefine good and evil to make themselves feel righteous. They turn pain into proof of virtue. Failure into identity. And anyone who rises is demonized as oppressive. MAGA is not rebellion. It's submission dressed as revolution. It promises power but delivers dependence. It flatters the wounded ego, but never heals the wound. Because healing requires letting go of who you think you are. And that's the real cost. Not political. Existential. You will have to kill the version of yourself that needed the illusion. The version that was comforted by flags and enemies. The version that believed power could be borrowed from the crowd. When you awaken, you lose your excuses. No more blaming. No more deflecting. Just you, raw, confused, alone, but also free. And that freedom is not a gift. It's a responsibility. You will walk without certainty. You will offend those who need the lie. You will lose friends who only love the mask. And you will feel moments of madness when silence replaces slogans. And no one is there to clap when you speak. But Nietzsche knew that madness is the birth canal, the death throes of the false self. And on the other side is not comfort, but clarity. The kind that burns away all that is unearned, all that is borrowed, all that is weak. And from that fire, you emerge, not as a follower, not as a believer, but as a creator of new values, of a life that is truly yours, even if no one understands it. Because to awaken is not to rise above others. It is to fall out of illusion, and that fall is endless. But it is also real. And in a world of ghosts and echoes, realness is sacred. So ask yourself again. Do you want to feel powerful or be powerful? Because only one of those paths will break you. And only one will make you whole. Comment below, what part of your identity did you have to bury to finally breathe? Part 6. The fire you fear is the one that frees you. Everyone wants freedom, until it burns. Until it tears away the masks. Until it leaves you standing naked before your own contradictions. Nietzsche didn't romanticize liberation. He knew it was violent. Not because of what it gives, but because of what it destroys. Freedom doesn't hand you peace. It strips away your lies. It exposes the borrowed beliefs you clung to for safety. The borrowed politics. The borrowed identity. The borrowed anger that was never truly yours. All of it must go. And what replaces it? Silence. Uncertainty. Space. The terrifying vastness of having to build meaning for yourself. Not receive it. Not inherit it. But carve it, bloody and alone. Most people run from that. They crawl back into the noise. They rejoin the herd, even if they know it's a lie. Because obedience feels warm when you've tasted the cold air of truth. And so they wear their chains with pride. They confuse safety with virtue. And call the brave man dangerous. But Nietzsche never spoke to the crowd. He spoke to the one who's already breaking. The one who feels the crack in the illusion. The one who's dying in the middle of applause. And to that man, he says, don't run. Burn. Because the fire isn't punishment. It's purification. It's the death of the slave within you. The slave who needed to be told what to believe, who to follow, who to hate. That voice, that inner tyrant, must be silenced. And silence is painful. Because in the silence, your real voice begins to emerge. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It speaks softly, but it cuts like a blade. It says, you were meant for more. Not more comfort. More truth. More reality. More responsibility. The kind of life where no one can save you. But no one can control you either. You become dangerous. Not to others, but to the machine. To the system that feeds on your confusion. To the culture that sells identity as product and rage as patriotism. You become a fracture in the program. A glitch in the ritual. And they will come for you. They will laugh. They will slander. They will try to pull you back into the cave. But you've seen the fire now. And even if it scorches your skin, you know it's real. So let them call you mad. Let them call you lost. Let them call you un-American, godless, broken. They don't know what you've survived. They don't know that you chose the pain that frees over the comfort that enslaves. And that choice? That brutal, beautiful choice is everything. Comment below. What was your breaking point? The moment you stopped believing the story. Part 7. You already knew. Long before this video. You felt it in the silence between slogans. In the ache behind your loyalty. In the hollowness of a chant you never questioned. Until it stopped meaning anything. You knew this wasn't power. You knew it wasn't truth. But you were afraid. Afraid to stand alone. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of losing the tribe you never really belonged to. So you wore the mask, until the mask started wearing you. Nietzsche didn't ask you to rebel. He dared you to become. Not louder, not angrier, but deeper, clearer. To leave behind the borrowed gods, the sacred symbols of comfort, and the false heroes you once thought would save you. Because you don't need saving. You need remembering. Remembering who you were before the slogans, before the tribe, before the illusion of identity swallowed your will. You were fire once, and fire forgets how to kneel. Now is your time. To walk, to burn, to become. Not because it's safe, but because anything less would be a betrayal of the soul you buried just to belong. So let the herd march. Let them chant. Let them believe the same lie you no longer can. Because they'll never understand what it cost you to wake up. But somewhere out there, someone is listening. Someone else is breaking. Share this with them. Give them the courage to leave the illusion behind. Subscribe if you're done pretending. Like this video if the truth hurts, but freeze. And turn on the bell. Because the next one might be the final fracture they need to escape the dream.